I'm about to speak with Walid Shoebat, once a radical Muslim Jew hater, now a lover of Jesus who stands with Israel. He has a message for us today.
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Well, these are some pretty radical book titles. Why I Left Jihad, The Root of Terrorism and the Return of Radical Islam. Why We Want to Kill You, the jihadist mindset and how to defeat it. How about The Case for Islamophobia, Jihad by the Word, America's Final Warning. How about God's War on Terror, Islam Prophecy and the Bible. My guest, Walid Shoebat, is the author of, or co-author of, these different books I mentioned. A man who was raised to hate the Jewish people in Israel and now is a staunch supporter of Israel with a word of warning for the West. Walid, thanks so much for joining us on The Line of Fire today.
You bet, Mr. Brown. Thank you for having me.
Well, for those that don't know you, before we get to contemporary issues and things that you feel are important for America, where were you raised, and what did you think about the Jewish people in Israel growing up?
My mother was pregnant 9 months with myself. She married my father, who was Muslim in the U.S. She was visiting the Middle East in Bethlehem. I was born as soon as she arrived in Bethlehem, and I grew up, with a mother who was not permitted to use her return ticket, so she was stuck for 34 years in the Middle East. It took years after I have been involved myself growing up in that environment, had been stoning worshippers at the Wailing Wall, the very things that Palestinian youth do, graffiti on the walls. Things evolved to demonstrating to hand-in-hand combats with the Israeli military, then ending up in the prison, being recruited in prison as a terrorist with Mahmoud al-Mughrabi and planting a bomb. Although that became a controversy by CNN, they couldn't prove that I was never in prison. I was in prison. I was who I am. The State of Israel has never denounced who I was. And later on, of course, I came to the States to continue my studies. And the years, joined the Muslim Brotherhood years later. I wanted to convert my wife to Islam. In that process, my wife asked me, basically, if you think that the Bible has been corrupted, show me the corruptions in the Bible. I will be glad to become Muslim. So praise Allah, I said to myself. Studied the Bible, spent a year studying the scriptures, and I was fascinated with what I studied. And that became really the dynamo of my life. And later on became an advocate for Israel, spoke at universities, been in the media, and later on now we have Rescue Christians. We're rescuing suffering believers all over the Muslim world. And things, grew tremendously as when I first made a promise to God that I will basically carry on whatever He wants me to do. And so here I am, still surviving, still working.
Yeah, quite an amazing story. Let's start here then as we begin to unfold this for our listeners. A few questions. We've got a break coming up, but here's what I want to ask you. Would you say, and we'll get into this when we come back, would you say that your experience just mirrored a certain radical faction of Islam and is not really representative of Islam in general? Would you say that the feelings you had towards Israel and the Jewish people are commonly held to by Muslims around the world? And then what this means for us in the West. So we'll take that all up when we come back. But the best website, if people want to find out what you're doing, Walid, where should they go?
Shoebat.com, as you spell the word shoe, S-H-O-E, and bat, B-A-T, S-H-O-E-B-A-T.com.
All right, friends, we come back. I want to ask these questions about Islam. Was he just someone, Walid Shoebat, just someone that got exposed to radical factions? Or is Islam overall as a religion of peace? Were his sentiments towards Israel typical of Muslims worldwide? And, if the Bible is true, does that mean you're supposed to support Israel today? We'll be right back.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome back, friends, to The Line of Fire. It is Thoroughly Jewish Thursday, but we'll often focus on issues having to do with Islam and the Middle East as well. And my guest, Walid Shoebat, feels that there are also very important issues regarding Mr. Obama's own family, having to do with radical Islam, and I want to allow him to share those with you, our listening audience. If you have a question for my guest, we may get to some calls, 866-34-TRUTH. Walid, what were you taught from your earliest days about the Jewish people and Israel? In your home, as a kid, in the schools, what did you grow up learning and thinking?
Well, the Islamic religion is not void of eschatological view. It's got its own set of eschatological view, which is the antithesis of the biblical view in eschatology, in which, if you look at the Zechariah chapters 12 and 14, as you may know, that Christ will eventually come and rescue the Jewish people. And in the Islamic eschatological view, that the day of judgment shall not come to pass until the tribes of Islam come to defeat the tribes of Israel in Jerusalem and the surrounding nations. So there's the surrounding enemies of Israel right there in Islam, and this permeates the entire culture. It's not only the educational system, as many Jewish think tanks think that we need to change the Palestinian education system, but no, it's much further. It's the mosque system. It's the history ingrained. When I walked into a church, when I first became a Christian, I was shocked at how much of the biblical eschatological view that's been kind of ignored. The Christians didn't know anything about the Hudaybiyah treaty between Muhammad and how he basically entered into Mecca and began to expound after that Umar ibn al-Khattab. You had asked the question, was it simply a peaceful form of Islam, or was there some sort of just a small group of fundamentalists? Was it a small group of fundamentalists that began wars with Christendom at that time in 636 AD when Islam had invaded and sent a message to Christian Emperor Heraclius, and they went into in Syria. The incursion continued into North Africa. Was it peaceful Islam when they had the Battle of Lepanto, the Battle of Poitiers, the Battle of Vienna to destroy Christendom even in Europe, even invading into Spain? So, in other words, the Western thinking is void of this historical content that says Islam itself in its inception, from the beginning of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, to the Sahaba, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr before him, of invasions to destroy Christendom, the entire 1040 window that we talk about, that the unwitnessed areas in the Middle East, that was all Christian nations. In other words, Islam came as an Aryan heresy that denied the Father and the Son. And we look at the Bible itself. The four references regarding the Antichrist or the spirit of Antichrist is regarding the denial of the Father and the Son. So it's a Unitarian religion. It's a religion that is so focused on fighting strictly the Jews and the Christians. And this is very well described in the Quran, described in the history. In fact, I dare anybody to find me a Muslim scholar that would defy the history of Islam or defy Sharia. I've had debates with Muslim scholars. I've flown all over the place. And I've faced them. The first question I ask, are you willing to denounce Sharia? I haven't had a single Muslim scholar today tells me, yeah, I'm willing to denounce Sharia. That means amputation of hands, stoning of women, you name it. So in other words, the question is Islam has been hijacked, or is Islam from its inception violent? I go for the second. Islam is violent from its inception. It was not hijacked.
And what about the idea of Muhammad being the ideal man, the perfect model to follow? How does that tie in with violence and even the question of beheading?
Well, look, Islam has the alkaline and it has the acid reality. Okay? So you'll find verses that has alkalines, and those alkaline verses are usually abrogated.
Abrogated.
Yeah,
okay.
They've been abrogated. So the West does not understand the principles of an-nasikh wal-mansukh, what abrogates verses that calls for peace, like the verse of the sword in Surah 9 abrogates everything that calls for peace in the Quran. And so since the West is not aware of this, this is the methodology that is used. In fact, Muhammad used the same methodology on the Jews in Saudi Arabia. In fact, even the Muslim Brotherhood plans under the spiritual leader of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi says that we need to go back to the Makkian era in which Muhammad used that kind of system. This is why they have what is called muruna. I know many in the West understand taqiyya, but there is another side to it. Taqiyya is a Shiite concept. But the muruna concept comes from the Muslim Brotherhood, which says that Islam can sanction prohibitions, i.e., Muslim can do anything, even murdering, even killing, even a Muslim girl like Huma Abedin marrying Anthony Weiner, who's a Jew, is permissible in Islam. In fact, Huma Abedin, as it turned out, wasn't simply a Muslim Brotherhood member, but a Muslim Brotherhood leader. And we have established tremendous documentation on that issue, which Michelle Bachmann took to the White House, and she got a black eye as a result. She was attacked by McCain to argue of the infiltration of the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States.
How is it then that our State Department, as the Muslim Brotherhood was rising in Egypt, basically said these are good guys and not involved in terror? Was that just sheer duplicity from our State Department?
Well, the State Department has always betrayed the American people and the Jewish people. If you look historically, it was George Marshall who basically objected about the establishment of the State of Israel. Thank God the president had a dream, and in that dream he saw the Jewish people in the ovens, being killed in the ovens, and he went against George Marshall, and the United States ended up supporting the State of Israel. So history repeats itself. When it comes to the State Department, it's always been a traitor. Now, I do not know why. It's not duplicity. It's not just simply being naivete. But when we come to the liberal movement, I mean, this is something very important to understand. Islam is not a conservative religion. Keith Ellison is not conservative. He swore on the Quran. All his policies is very liberal. Al Gore compliments Islam, hates Christianity. The President of the United States, if you look at YouTube, he talks about the Bible. He really condemns the Bible, says the Bible teaches slavery, but yet when it comes to the Quran, the Holy Quran says. So in other words, the liberal movement, they have much in common, because Islam itself doesn't believe that life begins at the moment of conception as we do. Life has a gestation period. Well, this tickles the ears of the abortionists. Al Gore talks about Islamic himaz, in other words, environmental protectorates in Islam. And that, he compliments Islam very much. Islam has what it's called al-ishtirakiyya al-islamiyya, which means spreading the wealth. As Muhammad, when he moved from his people moved from Mecca to Medina, the story of al-Muhajirun wal-Ansar, when they moved to Medina, they were aided by Muslims in Medina who shared the wealth. So Islam has the concept of socialism. Islam talks about the Big Bang Theory. All the Muslim talkers in the U.S. or the slick willies in the universities say that the Quran teaches the Big Bang, and that is in the Quran. So this tickles the ears of the evolutionists. So it is not as many think. It is theistic evolution that Islam believes in a modern way. So basically, the idea of the liberals in the West is really a war against Christianity. That's the bottom line. And the Muslim Brotherhood has stated it in their documents very clearly that we will use the entities that sympathize with our cause, i.e., the liberal movement. You look at Jimmy Carter. He was against the Shah of Iran. What happened? The Khomeini came from France, parked in Iran. We had the revolution of Iran, the first Islamic revolution, a thing we're still dealing with. Now we have the whole nuclear issue, has just evolved tremendously.
So just 1 minute before our next break, but when Operation Cast Lead was taking place and Israel was going after Hamas terrorists in Gaza, there were coalitions against Israel's actions here in America. There were some on the streets shouting, Jews need to go back to the ovens. But what I noticed was that some of the coalitions also had feminists and gay activists, the very ones who could actually march the streets of Israel and even have a gay pride event, I'm sorry to say, in Israel. But if they were in Gaza, they'd be killed. Is it a spiritual blindness, a demonic thing that unites people like this against Israel in such an irrational way?
That's a very interesting question, very interesting point, because you look at every anti-Israel demonstration. Who's holding hands? Socialist, communist, extremists, gays and lesbians. It's obvious that evil always will unite with itself against what is good. It's always these institutions condemn Israel for defending itself. It's like a cop who's cleaning the drug problem in the neighborhood, and if he has to shoot a drug pusher in a fire combat, they don't look at the issue of what was the reason or what was the intent of the officer. In the same case, Israel, what is intent from bombing Hamas? Because Hamas lobs Qassam rockets. You have also Hezbollah had lobbed, rockets at Israel tremendously. In fact, this reminds me,
I'll tell you what. Yeah, let's just jump in here. We come back. Let's ask: does America have anything to be concerned about in terms of Islam? I'm going to let my guest speak freely, and then we'll evaluate what he has to say. We'll be right back.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome back, friends, to The Line of Fire. Today, my guest, Walid Shoebat. His website, shoebat.com, Shoebat. He has referred to terrorist activities he was involved with before becoming a Christian. You can go to his website, and he will take on the challenges where people have said he's made this up, this is not true, this is not accurate. He has dealt with these issues, and you can go to his website and review his responses to those charges. Walid, as the author or co-author of books with titles like The Case for Islamophobia, Jihad by the Word, America's Final Warning, look, we have all kinds of conspiratorial theories here in America, and everybody's telling us, watch out for this one or that, or it's all the Masons, or it's all the Illuminati, or this or that. Convince us that you're not just another fearmonger, and that there is a warning for America with Islam. Go ahead. Speak freely.
Yes. I mean, I am totally against those notions. I do not like the conspiracy theories. I do not like what Alex Jones talks about. I strictly focus on fact. Everything we say has to be backed up by fact. It was President Obama, fact, spoke in Egypt and basically had the red carpet for the Muslim Brotherhood when the government
and by the way, even used a phrase like when the Quran was revealed, which speaks of a certain bias. But go ahead.
And he kept giving quotes in the Quran and everything else, and he gave the green light for the Muslim Brotherhood to begin its movement. It was the United States under President Obama who began the incursions into Libya, into Iraq, and into also Syria. The situation of the Christians in Syria is dire. And it's not just only the Democrats, but also somebody in the Republican, like John McCain and others, who basically advocated such issues. So it was the United States, no question, that basically even the best experts in the world will say the United States have worked tirelessly into advancing even Turkey. Turkey was a secular nation, and our relationship with Turkey is very good today, even though they aspire Islamic causes, even though they're housing the Muslim Brotherhood who are fleeing from Egypt. So basically infusing Egypt and allowing the Mursi and allowing the Muslim Brotherhood to be victorious in Egypt, causing havoc in Egypt, which is very detrimental for the state of Israel. And so, not only President Obama, but his entire family. In fact, it is known fact that his brother Malik Obama is a executive director of the Islamic Dawah Organization, an affiliation that deals with the Union of Good. Union of Good has been designated by the U.S. Treasury as terror entity. In other words, financing terrorism. In fact, President Obama's brother has a kafiyah. We have provided the photo with the Hamas kafiyah. On it has the flag of Palestine from the river to the sea, it says. In other words, there is no state of Israel. On it says in the Arabic, Al-Quds lana. Jerusalem is ours. We will be marching forth. Innana qadimun in the Arabic language. This speaks volumes. And if executive order, presidential executive order 13224 established What Malik Obama, President Obama's brother, does is a terror entity who works for the government of Sudan. His boss was Siwar Dahab. We have established with video in which he basically spoke for Hamas with Ismail Haniyeh and have given speeches as we're coming and marching towards Jerusalem. You know, he was in an event alongside with the head of the IHH, who basically had sent a flotilla to Israel. So we're dealing with a family that is notoriously Muslim fundamentalist, including President Obama himself is very much inclined with his family, and they've been best man at each other's weddings. Malik Obama is his older brother, even the grandmother herself. You know, Mama Sarah, they raise funds. They have a 501c3, which was retroactivated to Malik Obama by Louis Lerner illegally. So, in other words, he's got connections with the state, with the U.S. Treasury, in which he can illegally run an operation that supports the Muslim Brotherhood, that supports the Islamic movement. In fact, even his cousin Musa Ismail Obama, we have the recordings on Al Jazeera television in which he talked about how the U.S. funds of the Barack H. Obama Foundation is money that they spend to recruit Muslims to go from Africa into the three top most virulent Wahhabi schools in Saudi Arabia. One of them is al-Qura University, which was founded by Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, the father of Wahhabism. You know, all these are documented. We have the photos of the billboards he runs in Kogelo, Kenya, in which he uses the Barack H. Obama Foundation, as well as WAMI, which is the World Union for Muslim Youth, another entity that's identified by the State of Israel. We have the reports, we have the terrorism reports, official reports from the State of Israel, showing how these organizations fund Hamas. We have a litany of websites all over the world in which it directly links to President Obama's brother organization, which is the Islamic Dawah organization, how you can fund Hamas, send monies to Hamas. This is fact. This is no fiction. So in other words, the entire family are in bed with the Wahhabists, with the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, it was President Obama himself who twisted the arm of Keir Silva of southern Sudan because he wanted to basically thwart and finally remove Omar al-Bashir, Malik Obama's boss, from Sudan. It was President Obama who intervened and twisted his arm in a very mean-spirited conversation with him, telling him that he should not retaliate against North Sudan. So we're talking about persecution of Christians in Syria, in Sudan, in Iraq, and there's nothing being done about the persecution of believers. Let's not forget what our Lord said in Matthew 25, "For I was hungry, you gave me no food, right. I was naked." You know, those things are very crucial to Christians. We sit here in America. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Just take a couple more seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah, we talk about prophecy, yet we are all prophecy buffs, but we don't think about the suffering Christians. We have to think about
the here and now. We can debate about coming tribulation, but what about the horrific tribulation here and now? All right, that leads to an important question. Do Christians fight back? What is the right posture? Is it time for Christian armies and Christian self-defense, or does that take us away from the spirit of the cross? An important question we'll take up as soon as we come back. And if you feel that you have factual information to rebut what my guest has said, contact us at info@AskDrBrown.org. I wanted to give Walid the opportunity to lay out his case. If you feel he's making this all up, he's delusional, well, by all means, contact us at info@AskDrBrown.org. If you are a scholar in the field, feel he can rebut, you can rebut him, I'm sure. He'll be very happy to discuss it and take you on. And friends, you know we are on the front lines of helping the church to understand God's purposes for Israel and reaching out with the gospel to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. A couple years ago, I debated my friend Rabbi Shmuley Boteach on the issue of homosexuality, one of the most fascinating debates we've done. I also did a debate a few years before that with a gay activist who claimed to be a born-again Christian. I want to send you these two debates as a gift for your gift of any size. We'll send them out to you on DVD. Stand with us today. Would you do that? 1-800-278-9978. This is by phone only, so you need to call 1-800-278-9978. Thanks for your generosity. Together, we're making a difference.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown. Your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
My special guest today, Walid Shoebat, his website, Shoebat, Shoebat, Shoebat.com. He's not afraid to tackle controversial issues. It's somewhat miraculous that he's still alive with the number of people who hate him, would not like to see him alive. I'm involved in a lot of controversy day and night myself, but I would say that legitimate death threats that have come my way are few and far between, if any. It would be the opposite with my guest. I'm not going to be taking calls, but I do want to discuss a number more important issues. Walid, before we get back to the issue of persecution of Christians and the question that your son Ted has addressed in words that some are concerned about in terms of the force or the rhetoric, so we'll come back to those issues. But as followers of Jesus, we want to share the good news. We want to evangelize. We want to make disciples of the nations. We want to spread the faith. Well, Muslims in that sense are evangelistic. They want to spread the faith. But, of course, Islam does not primarily mean peace, but submission. What would be the primary difference in the mindset of a Muslim who wants to spread his faith around the world and the mindset of a follower of Jesus who wants to spread his or her faith around the world?
Well, Islam is the antithesis of Christianity. Islam is an aggressive warfare that's been commanded by the Prophet of Islam. Muhammad himself stated, "Umirtu an uqatila an-nasa hatta yaqulu la ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah." I have been ordered to fight all the nations until everyone say there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. Our faith is not an aggressive faith. It's a defensive faith. This is why I argue with my American compatriots that they keep talking about turning the other cheek. Now, are you married, Mr. Brown?
Yes, I am. Grandfather. Father and grandfather.
Grandfather, praise God. If somebody comes into your window and is going to harm your children or your grandchildren, would you not shoot that intruder and protect your family?
Right. Obviously, if someone broke into our house, our kids were out of the house, but let's say when the kids were in the house, if they broke in, I wouldn't say, well, Jesus taught me to turn the other cheek, and therefore, here's where the kids are, here's where my wife is. I would do what I needed to do to stop them, do my best to preserve life, but do what I could to do to stop them. I would obviously make a distinction between that and persecution for the faith. In other words, if someone came, the government
they came to kill you because you're Christian. They came to harm you because you're Christian. They came to rape your wife. Trust me, you would shoot first, and you'd insist your wife cleans the mess afterwards. That's the case. In Syria, you take, let's say, the Lions of the Cherubim, a group of Christians who decided to defend their church. They have killed 60 terrorists invading that church. You can look it up. The Lions of the Cherubim. Other Christians in Syria chose the route of suffering. And what happened? The entire country is nearly void of Christians. They've been persecuted so badly. Women were raped and all these things. So I think there's a decisive moment we have to say that defensive mechanism is obligatory. Christ himself said, the most beautiful thing is for somebody to die for their friends. How do you die for your friends? Do you commit suicide? Or do you put your life on the line in defensive way so you can defend them? And if you survive, fine. If you die, then you've died for your friends as a martyr. So Christianity is not void of martyrdom.
Yeah, but, all right. Well, tell you what, we're into this now. We've got a short break and then an extended segment. If the government came to arrest me because I was a follower of Jesus, or if Jewish extremists came to attack me, I would not shoot to kill. I wouldn't even think of that. If that had been the mindset of Christians through the centuries, we wouldn't have been martyred for the faith. But you raise a question. What happens when you have national attack? What happens when you have these atrocities committed? Do you flee? What's the right response? So I do want to talk about this plainly. People's lives are at stake. These are not theoretical issues. So I'll continue with this with my guest, Walid Shoebat, as soon as we come back.
Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
All right, this is a very critically important discussion that I'm having with my guest, Walid Shoebat. Again, his website, SHOE, as in shoe, and bat, shoebat.com. Walid, let me first say that I'm 100% with you in raising concern and sounding the alarm about the atrocities being committed against Christians around the world, and they're primarily being committed by Muslims, be it in Syria, be it in Egypt, be it in Nigeria, northern Nigeria, other parts of the world. And it always grieves me when I'll have Christian friends who are really concerned about a human rights violation in Israel, which, if you boil it down, is a pretty minor thing compared to people being slaughtered by the thousands. What the death toll, 140,000 plus in Syria, with horrific atrocities being committed against the Christian community there. What's happened in Iraq, with as evil as Saddam Hussein was, there was still a controlling presence he had in terms of liberty for Christians. Now, large percentage of the population, or a certain percentage, has fled. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands killed or displaced. So I'm totally with you in terms of raising the urgency of this situation. But let's talk this through. So I don't want to downplay that. I've been spat on in the face by hostile person I was witnessing to, or others who threatened me. I was preaching in India, and radical Hindus took over the stage with knives and razor blades in our hands. Well, we didn't spit back, didn't fight back, got off the stage, and I thought we may get hit, we may get hurt, but it never occurred to the Indian brothers there, one of whom's been stoned, others have been martyred, that we were supposed to physically fight back or resist. And we know Jesus says, if you're persecuted in one city, flee to another. Paul says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him, overcome evil with good, etc. We know the problem of holy war mentality. When Christians have taken on holy war mentality, we know in the Crusades, all the Jews gathered together in the great synagogue of Jerusalem and burned to the ground as Christians marched around it, singing, Christ, we adore thee. So as a Jewish follower of Jesus, in particular, I'm sensitive to calls for, quote, holy war, and always explain the revolution that we're talking about is one of overcoming evil with good, overcoming hatred with love. That's one thing. But now we're looking at it on a national level, and I guess the question would be, if we knew as Americans that Muslims, let's say they were Taliban or they were Al-Qaeda, they were bombing and attacking a Christian community, and we had military there, we would probably all support bombing them, but we'd somehow separate that from our faith. So I'm being totally candid with you. I have concerns about some of the language, but I know these are complex issues. So over to you.
That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about you being spat on in India. We're not talking about, let's say, the Jews who got burned by the Crusader. That's another issue. In fact, even the burning was carried out by Crusader followers. It wasn't orders from the headquarters. So that's a different discussion.
Yeah, there was a rabble there involved in it. I understand that.
We both agree that was evil. But what wasn't evil was really protecting Jerusalem from the invading armies of Islam. There's part of the Crusader Wars that I agree with. But that's not the subject of today. The subject of today is militarism, in other words, national level. The question, like when Christians witness to Muslims, I watched them when I first became Christian. They sit there and apologize about the warfare that happened in Europe. I mean, if it wasn't for the battles of Lepanto, Vienna, and Poitiers, all Europe would have been Islamized, just as we have in Turkey. So no one can say that Christendom could not defend itself in the Battle of Tours, of Poitiers. Without that, the whole world would have been Islamized. So you cannot argue and say that was a wrong war. In fact, many Protestants stood with the Muslims in those wars, and especially the Battle of Lepanto. Let's not forget history. And so this mentality of no war whatsoever is really a mistake, because here's the question. When Christian apologizes about the Crusades, about the warfare and all these things, they don't really apologize completely, because it is forbidden for the Christians to war in the Middle East, but it's not forbidden for Israel to fight in the 6 Days War. Can you tell me emphatically Israel was wrong to fight in the 6 Days War? They had a war, and that was a godly war. And God ordained that war. It was fought in 6 days. It paralleled the Battle of Joshua. On the seventh day, early in the morning, the children of Israel arose, went around the walls of Jericho 7 times. It was a 6 days war for Joshua. In fact, it was a 6 days war in the Battle of Poitiers as well, in which the French charged Martel. Martel means the hammer. You know, it sounds like another repetition of Maccabi. So, in other words, Christendom continued with the warfare idea, and this is something I do agree with my Catholic brethren and my Orthodox brethren, in which that part of history of Christianity is legitimate. We fought World War I. We fought World War II. It's okay for us in America to fight the enemies, Japan, who believed the emperor was God and believed in such heresies that we finally bombed them with nuclear weapons. It's okay for us, but it's not okay for the Christians in Syria to fight. It's not okay for the Christians in Africa to fight, to defend themselves. What kind of...
Yeah, so here's the question, and again, that's why we're having this discussion as candidly as possible. How does one draw the line? And by the way, I agree that there is such a thing as a just war. I agree with defensive wars. I'm glad that that America and the Allies were able to destroy Nazism. Of course, no question about it. But human nature being what it is, how do you avoid now the counter-terrorist mentality? How do you avoid now, okay, if we can be preemptive and kill these people here, then they won't be able to get to us in 10 or 20 years. How do you ultimately overcome evil with good? How do you ultimately forgive persecutors and pray for them? While, yes, let's say on a national level, defending ourselves. Look, we have police and things like that. And I would have no problem if a bunch of hooligans were attacking my house. I'd call the police. I'd have no problem. And if they said we're attacking your house because we hate you, you're a Christian, I'd still have no problem calling the police. But how do we avoid the wrong attitudes, the attitudes of now hatred and vengeance, and now we just become a counter-terrorist, violent organization? Because it's human nature to do these kinds of things.
Right. Right, we must also understand that we are obligatory as Christians to obey our government. Render unto God what is God's, what is Caesar to Caesar's. But we keep forgetting rendering unto God what is God's. Government has certain limits. The government can't tell me I cannot worship Jesus, I cannot worship in a church, I cannot worship in a synagogue. If that comes to that, if they say, you cannot worship no more, they begin to persecute Christians, then we have to go underground. We have to basically begin to combat the government in ways, and speaking out and suffering. And martyrdom basically is the water of the faith. Yes. I am talking about defensive mechanism in which we could work through our governments to defend Christians all over the world. So, we can't divorce the government. The government is involved. The problem is not the government. The problem is the people. The problem in America is that Americans, especially the Christians, have become lazy. You go to church lately, what are they talking about these days? They should be marching in the White House regarding the persecution of what's going on in the Christian world. It is doing nothing. What is going on is absolutely watered-down faith. The essence of our faith to defend what is God's. Christ's purpose for coming to earth was what? People say he came to save us. Well, yes, that's true. But the purpose for Christ's coming is in John. Christ came to what? Destroy the works of the devil. So how do we destroy the works of the devil? Doesn't mean we carry guns. No, it means we destroy the works of the devil by participating in the political system, by speaking out and by being a strong voice in this nation to basically change the government that we live under so they can begin to carry out policies that are favorable to the Christians. Look, the gay movement, they don't undermine their goals. They go full throttle on their goals. Yet what do we do with the gay movement here? We simply become wishy-washy. A Christian can be gay at the same time. A pastor can be gay. Well, this is nonsense. This is not, this is not Christianity. In other words, the watering of Christianity is the problem in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. It's self-centered. It's all about me. It's how I can have a better, more comfortable life. Jesus calls me not to take up the cross, but to be empowered by the cross for self-fulfillment. Of course, and I've been sounding the alarm about that for decades myself. And I want to say again, while I wanted to draw attention to concerns I had about certain words used or rhetoric or a call for a holy war or something like that, I absolutely I'm standing side by side in terms of saying we must raise our voices. We must call for government action. We must ask why all the attention on, say, Israeli settlements in the West Bank and not commensurate attention to the atrocities going on. If you ask your average American Christian who is Boko Haram, they've never heard of them, and yet these are brothers and sisters in Nigeria being slaughtered by these Muslim terrorists, Boko Haram. All right, we come back, one last segment with my guest. And again, I want to ask plainly, why does America have to be concerned about Islam here on our soil? And if I have a chance, I have an Israel-related question as well. Again, the website, shoebat.com, SHOEBAT.com.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends, for joining us today on this Thoroughly Jewish Thursday as we focus on issues related to Islam with my guest, Walid Shoebat. Walid, I wish we had several hours to talk. I appreciate you giving us an hour. I know that your schedule is very intense. One of my favorite lines from you is that you were a Jordanian one day and woke up the next day you were a Palestinian. You're saying growing up as a boy, you did not have the consciousness of, I'm part of the Palestinian people?
That's correct. We were proud Jordanian. In fact, the PNC, Palestinian National Council, never demanded to create a Palestinian state in the West Bank. It continued all the way till the 80s. Demanding to basically unite the East Bank with the West Bank. In other words, joining the West Bank back to Jordan. It was later on. You could look at history. It's always been that the Palestinians want to establish a state where Israel exists, period. And before 1967, they wanted to establish a Palestinian state in Israel proper. After 1967, they wanted to establish it in the West Bank. And, it's been always the call for Palestinians to annihilate Israel. This hasn't changed. So Hamas wants to annihilate Israel. Now they're making a state within a state with Gaza. You have Hamasistan. You have also on the West Bank the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PA, has always basically supported the idea of terrorism against Israel. So this is not a call for establishing a state. It's not a state that we were looking for. It is a state without Jews. It is exactly what we aspired from the beginning. That is the call of the Palestinian cause. There's never been a demand to establish a Palestinian state. By what right? In all the last 2,000 years, how many years did the Arabs rule the land they call Palestine? Less than 100 years. It was the Ottomans, it was the Mamluks, it was the Crusades, it was the English. So by what right do you want to establish an Arab state? It never existed as an Arab state for less than 100 years. And for 3,000 years it's been a Jewish state. Jerusalem has always been the focal point of the Jews who are not allowed to go to pray on the Temple Mount. What if the Muslims got robbed, got taken over, and Mecca all of a sudden was taken over by the Crusades? Will anybody argue that Muslims have no right to Mecca and the Kaaba itself? Now, imagine if the Jews took over the Al-Kaaba, and now they have the Al-Kaaba with the Jewish writings all around it, with that, the tarp they put on it, and no Muslim is allowed to enter that land. Do you think that will be tolerated? Yet a Jew is not allowed to set foot on the Temple Mount. Ariel Sharon, when he set foot in the Temple Mount, everybody was screaming, huffing and puffing and yelling. Why can't a Jew have a right to enter into the Temple Mount? He should have a right. That is the Solomon Temple. That's historically been proven fact, belongs to the Jewish people. So in other words, it's the ignorance of history is the problem.
Yeah, and in fact, when there are negotiations and discussions, Palestinian authorities made it plain that they do not want Jews in a Palestinian state, whereas you have 1.5 million Arabs living in Israel proper, and those Arabs do not want to be under Palestinian rule either. I'm sure you've heard the charge that with the erecting of the security fence, it's now destroying Christianity in Bethlehem, and the Christ at the checkpoint conferences talking about all the evils perpetrated by Israel against the Palestinians. I mean, I look at the wider issue of Islam trying to snuff out Christianity in the Middle East, and what happened with Palestinian Authority in Bethlehem before that. How do you react as a former Muslim and as a man born in this region when you hear these kinds of charges or hear about a Christ at the Checkpoint conference? How do you react as a Christian now?
Well, I look at the Bethlehem Bible College. I'm very familiar with Bashar Awad and all these guys who I have their own testimonies. They supported Hamas. In fact, Bashar Awad spoke in a church in Hawaii when he says that we need to support the existence of Hamas. Hello, this is a group that supports Hamas. We have to examine the Arabic language. I was one of the first in the country to basically begin to take the Arabic language of what these people say in the Arabic, translate it to the English, and the results are astonishing if you look at the researches in which these people are pro-Hamas. In other words, they think that Hamas can be moderated. They want to unite Hamas with Fatah. They are pro-PFLP. Graduates from Bethlehem Bible College who support the Checkpoint I have their testimonies, their writings in which they supported PFLP, the Popular Front to Liberate Palestine, so-called Christian George Habash, who is really a communist in disguise and who was a terrorist who killed civilians in Israel. This is the group that deals with this. They go to Iran, they meet with the Iranian Revolution, so on and so forth. We are dealing with a terrorist entity that has a facade of calling itself Baptist Christians and running a Bethlehem Bible College and doing the Checkpoint and everything else, when in reality they're pro-terrorism. In fact, all the major Catholic leaders in the Palestinian arena have been proven to have supported terrorism. In fact, Ilarion Capucci was a friend of our family. He was smuggling explosives. This is a major Catholic archbishop smuggling in the 70s explosives into the state of Israel and, causing havoc in the state of Israel. In other words, it's not just to support terrorism, but religiously they support the killing of Jews actually by supporting terrorism through material means and explosives and everything else. So we need to understand that not everybody who calls themselves Christians in the Middle East is Christian. This is basically a very strange theology they believe. Here Jesus is depicted surrounded by barbed wire in their artwork, and basically he's being persecuted by the Jewish people. Excuse me. It was the Israeli military that rescued the Church of the Nativity where Christ was born. It was the state of Israel with its military who took out the terrorists. In fact, even the Vatican supported these terrorists and sent them all over the place. So, we're dealing with an entity that is pro-terrorism. The Arab Catholic and the Arab Orthodox has always been on the forefront of trying to influence the Vatican into making it pro-Palestine and not pro-Israel. So we have a major problem, and that is the religious leaders. In fact, how many Christians live in Palestine today? In Israel proper, the ratio of Christians has never changed. In Palestine proper, the ratio of Christians has diminished. The question is, what's the difference there? I'm looking at the clock. I'm out of time, which means, folks, if you want to hear Walid Shoebat's warnings to America, you need to read his books. Go to shoebat.com, SHOEBAT.com. And friends, if you're involved with Christ at the Checkpoint or Bethlehem Bible College and you want to come on the air with me and discuss these issues, wonderful. Or better yet, invite one of us to speak at the conference next year. Walid, I wish we had more time. I appreciate your courageous stand, and I hope that America will wake up in time. May God's grace be yours. Thank you, sir. God's grace be upon you as well, brother.